Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Nancy Ryans, and today we're going to look at a short demo of my new painting that I've done called Almost Home. Now, let's first start off with the palette. This is my typical palette for a lot of my paintings: titanium white, cadmium lemon yellow, cadmium orange, cobalt blue, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, brown ochre, sepia, and Payne's gray. And these are all gambling colors. And there was one I forgot to add into this list, which I am adding kind of at the last minute. I did use a little bit of cadmium red in this piece, not a lot. So as far as other materials go, I've chosen odorless mineral spirits because I work in a studio that's attached to my home. You can use whatever brand you want. I just happen to use Gamsol, but you can use any type of odorless mineral spirits that works for you and that's available to you locally. I use a selection of a whole bunch of different small flats and small filberts for this piece, mostly flats, not a lot of filberts. I use the filberts mostly when I'm softening edges or blending colors, but mostly I use small flats, a variety of different makers and sizes, but mostly a 1/2 inch and lower in this piece. And then I've used a birch panel that I've double primed with just a basic acrylic gesso, whichever one you want to use is fine. So as we start off this piece, you can see I've sped this up just to make this a little bit more viewable on YouTube, but I'm laying in the darks in the yellow slicker with, it's actually red. Now red makes for a really nice dark color in a lot of different yellows, like aspen trees in the fall. Those yellow tones are best set off by more of a warm, kind of a burnt sienna or even an orange shadow color. So here I'm using that same principle and laying in the darker areas of this yellow slicker with mixtures of cadmium orange, cadmium lemon yellow, and a little bit of burnt sienna and some of that cad red. Now I'm just laying in some of the darker areas in the boots. This is a mixture of sepia and Payne's gray, and also adding that to some of the tack areas in the horse. That same exact color mixture. I'm not making a lot of different colors here. My whole goal with this piece was more cohesiveness in color rather than a lot of different individual colors. I'm looking for more harmony here and less blotchiness. Now I've already started in on the horse and I filled in the yellow slicker. The horse is really a grayed down mixture, meaning a lot of white was added to that mixture of sepia and Payne's gray. So you're getting a beautiful gray here. When you realize sepia is actually a little bit more of a cool brown. It's a yellow essentially, but it's a brown yellow. And the Payne's gray isn't really gray, it's more of a dark blue. So when you mix those two together, it turns out to be a beautiful gray that you can then bring it out with white and then make into these beautiful shades. Now I've added some of the darker areas to the horse, again with that similar mixture of Payne's gray and sepia. And in the jawline of the horse, that's really more of a burnt sienna sepia mixture. Now the horse isn't a traditional buckskin color. He's actually more of a silvery taupe color, a beautiful, beautiful buckskin. But he wasn't your typical kind of yellowy, dun-toned buckskin. So a lot of his coat was made with mixtures of that sepia mixed with Payne's gray and white. You know, I use a little bit of yellow ochre in some areas, less in others. And a little bit more white, obviously, as we come down into the leg area. The leg area there is, the highlight is really white with some of the cobalt blue and just a touch of Payne's gray in it to kind of gray it down a little bit. So that background is a lightened up mixture of the sepia and Payne's gray, and I mixed it actually with a little bit of yellow ochre to give it just a tiny little bit of a green, kind of sage green tone. It's hard to see that here, but there really is a sage green tone to it in person, but it's actually quite dark. And I'm actually just experimenting here with this darker background. I don't know if I want to use that in the larger piece, so I'm going to make a bigger piece, painting of this piece, which is going to be an 18 by 24. This one happens to be a 9 by 12, so a quarter of the size of that 18 by 24. But I am using these smaller paintings to really experiment with different ways of, handling areas in this painting. Now here in the bottom area, I'm mixing more white and yellow, so that's a yellow ochre there, so that it's a kind of a, again, it's still cooled down, but you can see there's a bit of a greenness to it. It's like a middle, kind of a middle tone sage green, but not overly green. And again, that's just that Payne's gray mixed with yellow ochre and a little bit of sepia, and then obviously white to lighten it up. And now I'm just using like a 1/2 inch brush to kind of go around and just, roughen up the edges, add some more interest into those edges. And at the bottom, I've added a stripe of that darker color that you see at the top, just to give it, the horse and the rider, a little bit more solidity to their footing, so it doesn't look like they're just floating in space there. And I've also added in some touches of, I think it's cad red there in the background, just a little bit here and there, just to bring a little bit different interest in there. Now the hands, I'm not putting in a lot of detail in the hands because there's not really a need for it in this particular piece. So the hands are really just a mixture of burnt sienna, and I think I used sepia in there with a little touch of yellow and white, just to give it just a little tiny bit of a flesh tone there in his hands. And I'll use that same mixture in the little bit of his face that you can see. Now his hat is very light colored, and so I'm using light tones in the shadow areas there. And then again, more grays here in the horse and in the saddle area of the horse. And now I'm just going in with a clean brush and mixing the edges so that the edges on the horse's legs are kind of soft. They're not super soft, but they are softened quite a bit. And just adding in some of the color in the saddle area. The colors are just a mix again of the sepia, Payne's gray, burnt umber, or excuse me, burnt sienna mixed with white and some yellow here and there. And so the hoof, again, a lot of grays in here. You can have a lot of fun playing around with creating different tones of gray. And what I like to do, before I finish my first day's session, is just blend everything in so that there aren't that many strong, sharp edges. So that's what I do at the end there. And then now we're going to be finishing up. I've skipped over a little bit here. The full demo of this is available on my Patreon site if you want the full thing. I'm coming in now and I'm reinforcing some of the shadow areas in the horse with more of an orange and red color. And again, that's my same mixtures of cad orange, cad red, burnt sienna, cadmium lemon, and some white. And I vary that quite a bit across the entire painting, so it's not the same exact color, but it's similar. Now there are parts of this horse where there's a little bit more of a dark gray, like in his neck and on his rump, so I'm adding that in. And then just again reinforcing some of the shadow areas on his legs there. And again, that's that Payne's gray sepia mixture. And again, what I typically do here when I'm painting is I lay everything in with sharp edges to start with, and before the paint dries, so meaning before I set my paints down for the night, I'll fuzz up or soften those edges where I don't want the viewer to focus their attention. So again, you want the sharpest edges to be where the focal point is of the painting, and the rest should be softer edges leading that viewer's eye to the focal point. So yeah, I lay everything in with sharp edges at first. Before the paint dries, before I set the brushes down for the night, I go in and soften those edges up. Now, coming back in, and just at this point, I'm refining all of the darks and the lights, adding in a little bit of more kind of oomph punchiness, and bringing in the highlights here into the yellow slicker because I lost some of that already. And just fixing some of the background stuff, kind of making the background a little bit more interesting with some interesting brush strokes, some kind of warmer and cooler tones there in the background, and just letting it, yeah, letting it speak to me at this point. Now I'm bringing in a little extra red here. It was a little bit of cadmium red mixed in with my gray, and just fixing up, some of the edges. What I typically do is step back a lot and look at the painting from a distance and then come up and fix things. Now I'm signing it, and then here's the finished piece. We're just going to zoom in and kind of see the finished work here. Again, the full demo is available on my Patreon site, and there I'll put the link to that below if you want to look for that. But there are the longer demo is actually a paid feature of my Patreon site. All right, so there it is, almost home, all finished, ready for its frame. And again, for the full demo, check out my Patreon site. And then if you want to book a workshop, just send me an email, nancy@nancyryanstudio.com. And more info is on my website, nancyryanstudio.com. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.